Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. I trust you're enjoying your weekend. Let's begin with an update related to our old friend, China Evergrande Group. Of course, most viewers know too well that the infamous developer triggered the years-long housing crisis in China, though just a symptom of a wider systemic issue, not the cause. Evergrande has nonetheless become the face of China's housing and debt woes. For months, Evergrande, with government support, has been working through its massive debt, and as of this week, we now have some updated information on the status of the company. On Monday, in its official Shenzhen Stock Exchange filing, China Evergrande Group said that its overdue debt, unpaid bills and payments involved in lawsuits, currently sits at a little under 1 trillion yuan, or to be exact, 900 billion RMB, 127 billion US dollars. Its overdue commercial bills, which are essentially IOUs to third-party companies also facing their own debt issues, amounted to around 246 billion yuan. According to the filing, the company is currently facing 1,426 unresolved lawsuits, involving a total of 350 billion yuan. Meanwhile, Evergrande is waiting to begin its massive 19 billion US dollar offshore debt restructuring plan, which has so far failed to gain enough support from its creditors. China's property sector has so far avoided complete collapse, but remains a major financial risk to the economy. Signs of renewed weakness are emerging in the residential market, with a rebound in home sales slowing in May to just 6.7% from more than 29% in the previous 2 months. We, of course, explored this earlier in the week. Some analysts argue that the Evergrande crisis is a microcosm of the types of issues the wider debt crisis in the Chinese economy is facing. Of course, this debt crisis, which is tied not just to the housing sector but to local government fiscal conditions, dwarfs that of Evergrande. Quote, "In the case of Evergrande, owners don't want to give up the potential upside of recovery, banks don't want to book losses, and even regulators want to postpone the financial distress effects of Evergrande's failure to deliver to suppliers, contractors, and homeowners. The longer they postpone, the more costs are likely to increase, and, meanwhile, the less able they are to deploy assets and resources to more productive uses. All of this is also true for local government debt that the borrowers can no longer service. The key to resolving bad debt is simple. The losses must be recognized and allocated. This is politically very hard to do, but if it isn't done explicitly, it will be done implicitly. And in the process, the costs will rise. Postponing the resolution doesn't help. For example, last week the People's Bank of China said that it would keep interest rates below the nominal GDP growth rate as a way of maintaining debt sustainability. But this only makes debt sustainable by implicitly allocating part of the debt servicing cost to net savers, i.e. households. While that may make the immediate debt servicing problem easier, it makes the underlying problem worse by reducing the household share of income, thus making China less reliant on consumption for growth and more reliant than ever on debt. There is no magic trick to resolving bad debt, not even monetizing it, something naive MMTers have once again been proposing. The only way to resolve it is to recognize the losses and write them down against existing assets. This means someone must absorb the loss." End quote. Next up, this week, central China's Henan province has been hit by what local media are calling, quote, "the worst pre-harvest rainfall in decades," end quote. The rainfall, which fell from May 25th through May 29th, has caused serious damage to the country's most important wheat region, the critical carbohydrate consumed in the north. According to local authorities, over 57,000 square kilometers of wheat fields were damaged by the wet weather. Though widespread famine is currently not anticipated, this will at the very least put pressure on food security and prices, not to mention the local economic devastation. Shanghai-based media outlet The Sixth Tone writes about the pain at the individual human level. Quote, The plight of farmers in Henan sparked widespread debate on social media, particularly after a video of a 79-year-old farmer in Zhengzhou weeping over his damaged crops went viral. End quote. And more may be on the way. Yesterday, national-level state forecasters said that Henan, the so-called granary of China, is expected to be hit by more torrential rain in the coming days. Meanwhile, as higher-than-usual rain levels hurt the wheat harvest of the north, in the south, hot weather and a lack of rain is resulting in power supply shortages. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes this week that a tight power supply for Guangdong, quote, is on the horizon as electricity exports from Yunnan, China's biggest hydro power producer, have been declining in recent months due to low rainfall. End quote. The outlet explains that to ensure power supply, the province of Henan ordered local aluminum producers since February to slash production to reduce energy consumption. It also reopened some coal-fired power plants that had been idle for years. Next up, the US, EU, and China. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. Sharing and subscribing is a huge help as well. It's only me making these episodes every day. It's a lot of work, but your guys' support is a huge source of motivation, so thank you very much. As always, anyone who can go that extra mile and help keep the channel sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. There is also the super thanks function in YouTube itself. As always, thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. The US-EU Trade and Technology Council this week published its joint statement. As we anticipated from earlier this week, the statement has not been as critical of China as some in the US may have wanted, a sign that Europe is still calibrating its China policy and is currently not as hawkish as Washington. In the statement, China is only mentioned by name twice, though many parts of the statement, particularly those dealing with economic coercion, make it clear that China is the target of criticism and concern. Beijing will not be happy with it. Quote, the statement voices concern about the impact of non-market economic policies on the global supply of semiconductors, particularly in legacy chips, which is important as at least they are aware of the risk that the PRC ends up with a commanding share of the legacy chip market and is able to price every other manufacturer out of the market, giving it enormous leverage over a key part of the semiconductor market that will remain vital for many years to come. End quote. The statement also specifically calls out China's, quote, amplification of Russian disinformation narratives about the Ukraine war. End quote. How has Beijing responded to this joint statement from the EU and the US? Quote, China is a victim of disinformation, and we also pay high attention to non-market economic practices. If the US and the EU are concerned about this issue, it is suggested that they take actions themselves. As major economies, the US and the EU need to take responsibilities, play a positive role, and provide an open, inclusive, transparent, and non-discriminatory environment for international trade and investment. End quote. Meanwhile, regular viewers will know that the EU and the US appear to have decided on the use of the word de-risking rather than decoupling when discussing the process of divesting and diversifying away from the PRC and its role in global supply chains. Indeed, this week, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said to the press after the just-mentioned US-EU Trade and Technology Council ministerial meeting that released the joint statement we just covered, that with regard to China, quote, the US and the EU are not looking for confrontation, a Cold War, or decoupling, but are focused on de-risking, end quote. It's still unclear what, in practice, the difference is between de-risking and decoupling. Perhaps there are some practical differences, or perhaps Western leaders simply believe that the term is just more palatable, both domestically and for Beijing. However, in the words of one commentator this week, the use of de-risking by the US, EU, and G7 seems to have really struck a nerve in the PRC government. This is likely because, unlike decoupling, the concept of de-risking, rhetorically at least, has been embraced by North Americans, Europeans, and the Japanese. And this is not good for the PRC. This week has seen a series of denunciations from the PRC Foreign Ministry, as well as the state media apparatus in Beijing. On Thursday, a PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson expressed, quote, "De-risking is becoming a buzzword lately. Before talking about de-risking, one needs to find out what the risks are. China is a source of opportunities, not risks. The true risks faced by the world are such practices as stoking bloc confrontation and brewing a new Cold War, wantonly interfering in other countries' internal affairs and causing regional turmoil and chaos, politicizing trade and science technology issues and destabilizing global industrial and supply chains, shifting domestic economic and financial risks overseas and reaping global wealth like a seasonal crop. The international community needs to be vigilant and jointly fend off these risks." End quote. The same day, the party flagship newspaper, The People's Daily, published a piece attacking de-risking efforts too, writing, quote, "If individual countries are de-Sinicizing in the name of de-risking, they are de-opportunizing, de-cooperating, destabilizing, and de-developing. From the decoupling theory to the de-risking approach, although the Group of Seven has changed its rhetoric, its hidden agenda remains the same. The so-called de-risking is nothing more than a new pretext for certain countries to contain and suppress China, and this rhetoric carries the chilling wind of the Cold War and zero-sum games." End quote. This is just one of several blistering commentaries released by state media this week. It does appear that Beijing is concerned that this term, de-risking, is taking root in the minds of policymakers from Washington to Tokyo to European capitals, which, of course, is not good news for China. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and I will see you all on Monday.